Welcome to Left Africa.
Imagine for a second that the United States government had to take half of its entire national savings, pack it into metaphorical crates, and keep it locked inside a fortified vault in London.
Right, just sitting there.
Yeah, just to guarantee the value of the American dollar. I mean, it sounds completely absurd.
Wait, totally.
You would probably say no sovereign nation on earth would ever agree to surrender that much control over its own wealth.
It sounds like a pure thought experiment.
Right.
But for 14 different African nations, that scenario hasn't been a hypothetical at all. That has been their absolute defining economic reality for the better part of 80 years.
And that mind-boggling reality is exactly where we are starting today. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a massive, real-time geopolitical shift, drawing from a razor-sharp intelligence dossier based on a fresh report from Business Insider Africa.
This is a phenomenal report.
It really is. And our mission for you today is to understand how the ECO, that is ECO, the promised single currency meant to unite West Africa, has just lost its very first member state.
A huge deal.
Yeah, and we need to figure out why this sudden defection happening right now on August 3, 2026, is threatening to just completely crack Africa's grandest integration projects.
It is a monumental shift. And to really grasp the sheer scale of what is unraveling here, we have to look at the foundations.
Yeah.
Because for 4 decades, the Economic Community of West African States, has been trying to launch this single currency.
Right.
The goal was profound, to replace a deeply entrenched colonial legacy with true monetary independence. But the demands of pooled sovereignty, of actually sharing the levers of power and sacrificing domestic control, are finally proving to be just too heavy to bear.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the core contradiction here, the thing that stands out the most when you read through these sources, is that the very currency designed to unite 15 nations into one unbreakable economic bloc is now the exact mechanism tearing their solidarity apart. And it all stems from the breaking news of this defection. One ECOWAS member state has formally decided to walk away from the timeline, essentially saying, we're out.
To understand the weight of that decision, you have to look at the sheer historical exhaustion of this project. If we trace the timeline back, the dream actually starts way back with the 1975 Treaty of Lagos.
Wow, that long ago.
Yeah, and the ambitions were formalized in 1983. By the 1990s, they had a concrete roadmap. They established the West African Monetary Zone. They laid all the bureaucratic groundwork for a shared central bank. This wasn't just a fleeting idea. It was a generational project.
A generational project with a litany of missed deadlines that reads like a masterclass in procrastination.
It really does.
Looking at the dossier, they set the initial launch for the year 2000. They missed it. They pushed it to 2003, missed it.
And then 2005.
Right. Then came 2009, 2015, 2020, and finally this looming deadline of 2027. Every single time, leaders gathered in massive conference halls in Abuja or Dakar, signed solemn declarations for the cameras, and then entirely failed to meet the launch criteria.
And those criteria, what economists call the convergence criteria, are the crucial stumbling block here. They were incredibly strict, designed to ensure that all 15 economies were perfectly mathematically aligned before merging their money.
Let me list these rules for you because they read like a punishing fitness regimen.
Yeah, go ahead.
To join the ECO, a country had to keep its inflation under 5%. It had to keep its budget deficit under 3% of its GDP. And it had to hold gross external reserves that could cover at least 3 months of imports.
Which is steep.
But I have to push back here. Why is something like an inflation target of 5% so incredibly hard to control for these specific nations? Why couldn't finance ministers just tweak their policies to hit that number?
What's fascinating here is where those rules actually came from. These convergence criteria, they weren't built from the ground up for the realities of West Africa. They were heavily modeled on Europe's Maastricht criteria.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the exact same rules used to create the Eurozone in the 1990s.
So they basically copy-pasted the European playbook onto West Africa.
They did, and that ignores a critical economic mechanism. West African inflation isn't typically driven by excessive money printing, or the things a central bank can easily dial back with, like a quick adjustment of interest rates.
Okay, so what drives it?
In these developing economies, inflation is overwhelmingly driven by food prices, by energy costs, and by global supply chain shocks.
But surely these governments know they are primarily agricultural economies. Can't they build financial reserves to cushion against those shocks? Or is the math just genuinely impossible for a developing nation?
Well, the math becomes exceptionally punishing because these countries are undergoing what we call structural transformation. They are trying to evolve from subsistence agriculture to industrial manufacturing.
Which takes a lot of money.
Exactly. To do that, you have to import heavy machinery, technology, materials, which drains your reserves and strains your budget. Then you throw in the unpredictability of agriculture. Think about what happens during a single bad harvest because of a drought.
Food prices would naturally skyrocket.
Yes. Suddenly, your country's inflation rate spikes to 8 or 9%.
Through absolutely no fault of the central bank.
Precisely. There is nothing a central banker can do about the rain. But because of that drought, the country instantly fails the ECOWAS convergence criteria. You have these rules designed for highly industrialized European nations acting as a literal trap for developing economies.
It makes me think of an analogy. Imagine a three-legged race, but with 15 people all tied together.
That sounds like a disaster.
Right. And they all have to run at the exact same European sprint pace. But if one person steps in a pothole or has a bad harvest, they stumble and they drag the other 14 runners down with them. It's a recipe for permanent paralysis.
It really is.
But because those criteria were so restrictive, we have to look backward to understand why this region is so obsessed with creating the single currency in the first place. Why endure this impossible three-legged race?
That's the real question.
And the answer lies in the deeply entrenched colonial currency system they're desperately trying to escape.
To understand the ECOWAS, you have to understand the ghost of 1945. You have to understand the CFA franc.
Right, let's guide you through the architecture of the CFA franc. It was created in 1945, right at the dawn of the post-war era. Originally, the acronym literally stood for the franc of the French colonies of Africa.
And the architecture of this system was both simple and brutal. When France was reasserting economic control over its African colonies after World War II, it established a system where African states had to deposit a massive portion of their foreign exchange reserves directly with the French treasury.
Just hand it over.
Yeah. Originally, it was even higher, but for a long time, it sat at 50%. Half of your national wealth physically held in Paris.
In exchange for what, exactly?
Well, France guaranteed a fixed exchange rate. The CFA franc was pegged, first to the French franc and eventually to the euro. And walking away from this deal was historically terrifying.
How so?
When Guinea tried to reject the CFA system and declare absolute monetary independence in 1958, the French administration didn't just leave, they pulled out completely and punitively.
What did they do?
They took the light bulbs out of government buildings, they smashed medical supplies, and literally ripped up telephone wires.
Oh, wow. That is unbelievable.
That historical trauma is the shadow hanging over this entire region. Walking away from the colonial financial architecture has always carried the threat of total economic destruction.
That context is incredibly chilling, and it perfectly frames the modern trade-off because the sources lay this out very impartially. On one side, you have fierce critics who call the CFA franc a monetary straitjacket.
Right.
Because of this system, African central banks in the CFA zone cannot set their own interest rates based on their own domestic needs. They cannot purposefully devalue their own currency to make their exports cheaper and more competitive on the global market.
They basically surrender monetary policy as a tool for national development.
It's like riding a tandem bicycle where a central banker thousands of miles away in Paris controls the handlebars and you just have to pedal.
But on the other side, defenders of the CFA, Francs, and there are many policymakers in Francophone West Africa who support it, they pointed very real, tangible benefits.
Like what?
Well, because the currency is pegged to the euro and guaranteed by the French treasury, these nations have historically enjoyed much lower inflation than their non-CFA neighbors, like Ghana or Nigeria.
Ah, okay.
During global shocks, like the Eurozone debt crisis or massive spikes in global commodity prices, the CFA economies were heavily insulated. For these defenders, trading your monetary sovereignty for absolute, guaranteed stability is a smart bargain.
But just put yourself in the shoes of a citizen in one of those countries for a second. Imagine knowing that the most powerful economic levers of your own nation are effectively being pulled from another continent. The West African ECO was supposed to be the great liberation from that system.
Exactly.
It was supposed to restore full monetary agency to the entire bloc, allowing West Africans to control West African money.
This raises an important question, though. What does monetary agency actually mean? Because as we see in the intelligence dossier, different nations had wildly different definitions.
Right.
And that fundamental misunderstanding is what ultimately doomed the project.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because those different definitions didn't just cause polite disagreements at closed-door summits, they led to a catastrophic political blindside in December 2019 that permanently fractured the bloc's trust.
The 2019 collision.
December 2019. French President Emmanuel Macron and Côte d'Ivoire's President Alassane Ouattara hold a joint press conference in Abidjan. And they announce a massive historic reform of the CFA franc for the Francophone West African bloc.
Yeah.
They announced the CFA franc is going to be renamed, and they're going to call it the ECO.
Not the ECOWAS ECO that all 15 nations had been working on for 40 years. A completely different ECO, co-opting the exact same name.
And as part of that announcement, France agreed to stop sitting on the Monetary Policy Committee, and they agreed to partially repatriate those foreign reserves held in Paris.
Wow.
But, and this is the massive catch, the peg to the euro would remain exactly the same. The handlebars of that tandem bicycle were still locked to Europe. But the elephant not in the room during this historic announcement, Nigeria.
Which is staggering when you think about the economics.
Yeah.
Nigeria represents over 60% of the entire GDP of the ECOWAS bloc.
60%.
Yes, this is the demographic giant of the continent. They possess massive oil reserves, a colossal population, and a heavily industrialized base compared to their neighbors. You have the undisputed anchor economy of the region entirely left out of a decision that steals the very name of the currency they had been negotiating for decades.
How did Nigeria react? Looking at the dossier, it wasn't just a polite diplomatic protest.
Oh no, the pushback was swift and severe. Nigeria's government, led by President Buhari at the time, completely rejected this move. For Nigeria, a true ECO had to be entirely independent. It had to be backed by the sheer economic weight of West African economies, operating with a flexible exchange rate dictated by local markets, not European ones.
Right, they wanted real independence.
To them, what Macron and Ouattara announced was just a rebranded CFA franc. It kept the euro peg, it kept the colonial architecture essentially intact, and it completely bypassed the 15-nation ECOWAS consensus.
So suddenly you have two parallel colliding visions. You have the Francophone bloc's euro-pegged ECO on one side and Nigeria's fiercely independent ECOWAS ECO on the other. But the timeline in our sources jumps from this massive fight in 2019 straight to the breaking news of August 2026. What exactly happened during that 7-year gap?
Toxic political paralysis. Neither side was willing to blink. You had the COVID-19 pandemic completely wrecking national budgets, followed by the global inflation spikes of 2022.
Just a perfect storm of economic issues.
Exactly. Yeah. All the while, the 2027 launch deadline for the ECOWAS currency became this looming, terrifying anvil. The confusion between the two ECOs meant that nobody was making actual structural reforms. They were just staring at each other across the diplomatic table while their domestic economies burned. Which brings us to the breaking point.
The anatomy of a defection. After decades of missed deadlines, impossible European-style convergence criteria, and the bitter betrayal of that 2019 split, well, somebody finally looked at the math and walked away.
Let's unpack the defectors' calculus here, based on the Business Insider Africa report. This unnamed member state took a hard, honest look at what it would actually take to meet those ECOWAS averages by the 2027 deadline.
And it wasn't pretty.
No. To get their inflation and deficits down to European levels, they would have to implement brutal domestic austerity.
Meaning what, practically? Like, what does that look like on the ground?
Meaning slashing government subsidies on basic necessities like food and fuel. It means aggressively raising taxes on an already struggling citizenry. It means massively compressing public investment in things like roads, power grids, and health clinics.
That sounds devastating.
For any democratically accountable government, doing all of that just to meet an artificial currency target is political suicide. The population simply could not bear the sacrifice of austerity for the sake of a blueprint.
But I have to ask, by walking away entirely, aren't they just giving up on the dream of a unified Africa? Isn't this a massive betrayal of Pan-African solidarity?
From an economic standpoint, the market reality dictates otherwise. The report frames this as the country choosing to play safe.
Play safe.
Yeah, by keeping their own domestic currency, they retain their own monetary flexibility. They can adjust interest rates or devalue their currency to manage their own specific crises, rather than waiting for a regional committee to agree. They are refusing to gamble their national stability on a deeply flawed union.
That makes a lot of practical sense.
It does. But the real danger for the rest of the bloc is the domino effect.
Because currency unions run on pure belief, right?
They depend on total, unwavering credibility. The moment one member leaves, the risk premium rises for absolutely everyone else.
Wait, to be clear, when you say risk premium, you mean that global lenders, international banks, bond markets suddenly get spooked and start charging these African nations much higher interest rates just to borrow money to build a road or a hospital, right?
That is exactly the mechanism. Global markets look at the defection and start pricing in the death of the entire project. Lenders demand higher interest rates because the safety of the herd is gone.
Wow.
If one country realizes the math doesn't work and walks away, investors assume the other 14 countries will soon realize it too. It turns the ECO from an imminent, promising reality into a slow-motion failure.
So what does this all mean? We have this massive crack in West Africa. But the dossier makes it clear this isn't just about 15 countries trying to share money. This reverberates across the entire continent.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at the other colossal integration projects happening right now in Africa. Look at the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AFCFTA.
That's a massive project.
It is an ambition to unite 1.4 billion people across 54 different regulatory regimes, currently using 42 different currencies. Or look at the African Union's Agenda 2063, which imagines a fully integrated, peaceful, and prosperous continent with seamless borders.
But the failure of the ECO is a massive flashing warning sign for all of those grand ambitions.
It forces a very uncomfortable conversation. West Africa is a region with shared borders, deep cultural and historical ties, and an existing economic community that has been meeting for decades.
They have all the building blocks.
Exactly. And if they cannot manage the domestic sacrifices required to share a single currency, it proves that integration requires far more than just signing declarations at summits. It requires the actual painful sacrifice of national sovereignty.
And this is exactly why you, listening right now, should care about this, even if you don't live anywhere near West Africa or follow emerging market economics. Because this isn't just an African story, it is a fundamental global lesson about the conflict between performative political solidarity and the brutal, unforgiving math of national self-interest.
Absolutely.
The state that just defected on August 3rd, they might actually be doing everyone a favor. They might be practicing a much more honest form of sovereignty.
By finally calling a spade a spade.
By admitting that trying to build a currency union without a political union, without deep fiscal integration, without a shared industrial policy, well, it's just a house built on sand. It's a beautiful blueprint with absolutely no foundation to withstand a storm.
The architecture was always performative. And the first country to state the obvious and walk away hasn't destroyed the dream. They've just refused to participate in the illusion any longer.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over today. If this 40-year attempt at building a European-style currency union has proven to be nothing more than a blueprint for a house built on sand for developing nations, it forces us to turn that lens outward.
Oh, definitely.
Look at our own global headlines right now. Look at the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, constantly dominating the news with talk of launching their own shared currency to rival the US dollar.
That is a fascinating parallel.
Right. Are these massive multinational economic treaties that we blindly trust today really built on solid ground? Or are projects like the BRICS currency just more performative architecture, completely ignoring the muddy waters of reality, just waiting for one brave member to finally look at the math, state the obvious, and walk away?
A deeply fascinating question to watch unfold.
Keep questioning the blueprints you see. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.